Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I'm going to be installing a speedometer and the escort. And you may be asking, why do I need to install a speedometer? What's wrong with the one that's in there? Well, the speedometer works. The problem is the speed sender doesn't. Okay, well, the speed sender works. Well, let me show you. So when I put the transmission back in, obviously I had to swap the speed sender over and all that stuff. And I didn't realize that the speed sender was keyed. It's slightly offset. And when I put it in, it went in most of the way and then got a little tough. So rather than me pulling it out and looking at it, I took a socket and hammered it into the transmission. I was thinking the O-ring was just getting kind of hung up there and causing it to stick. And it's one of the reasons why when you're really exhausted you should really just stop working on what you're doing and take a break. Yeah, so anyways, I went ahead and I hammered this guy into the transmission, and it was in there cocked 180 degrees out, and this broke off inside the transmission. Not a big deal, I have another sender. Put the other sender in, still no speedometer. What ended up happening was when this broke off, it fell down to the transmission, got cocked sideways, and sheared the ring, the speed ring, or whatever the hell it is you call it, off the differential inside the transmission. So, so in order to fix that, I have to pull the transmission out, pull the transmission apart, and replace that ring. That's not something I'm doing right now, so I'm not taking that transmission out again until I have to. So for a while I was just cruising around using a GPS speedometer, but I'm really not a fan of it. They update really slow. It's also nice to have a speedometer that's actually tied to the actual transmission, or the wheels. I don't know what that was. Yeah, the speedometer it's actually tied to the actual wheel speed, because it's nice for when you're drag racing. It's nice for being able to know when you've maxed out a gear. When you're spinning, obviously the speedometer slams all the way, to the top, to the fastest it can read in that gear. And then once you actually start getting traction, you'll see the speed kind of start to waver off a little bit, and then it'll bounce. So when it bounces, you've maxed out that gear. With a GPS speedometer, obviously that doesn't happen. So I decided since I can't use the type of sending unit that mounts inside the transmission, I remembered that the axle, the driver's side axle, has a speed ring on it for ABS. Cars don't have ABS, but yeah, so anyways, on the axle there's teeth on the end of the axle, and that's used for a magnetic pickup to drive the ABS speed sensor. I'm thinking I can use that same ring and use that as a standard speedometer, but obviously I can't do that with the stock speedometer, so I had to buy an aftermarket speedometer, and I went with this Glowshift Elite doodad 3.5 inch or 3 3/4 inch speedometer. The reason why I went with Glowshift is because they're cheap. There are some cheaper ones out there. Actually, I couldn't find very many speedometers that are cheap. You can find tachometers and other type of gauges, boost gauges and stuff that are like $10, but you look for a speedometer and you can't really find anything that's super cheap. It would have been nice to go with like Autometer, but I really didn't want to spend $300 and something on a electric speedometer. So I went with Glowshift, and the other reason why I went with Glowshift is because they have this nice daisy chain feature. I already have 2 Glowshift gauges in the car, so they come with this nice little daisy chain cable. So if you already have powered gauges, you just plug it in and you plug it into your next gauge. This might be a little short, but it does come with a longer lead, and I can just splice these two together and have a longer one, so I can just, because obviously I want this mounted in the dash, the instrument cluster, and my gauges are in like the center console area, so it's about it's a couple of feet difference. So yeah, like I was saying, what we have here is this Glowshift speedometer. It's really nice. It's got a bunch of different features like peak, recall, and stuff like that. And I actually didn't want the one with the glazed over, the blackout. I'm not a fan of that. You know, there's no light. You can't see in there. It's pretty dark. But it was either this or the white face, and so I went with this. But yeah, it's got speed recall and all that stuff like that. The way you program this is there's 10 ranges, I think. 10 different speed ranges, and then there's a fine-tune adjustment. So you have to set it to where it's relatively close, and then you take your fine-tune adjustment and you know, dial it in, calibrate it in. These are fed off of you can get a GPS module for this that will feed it, or you can feed it off your vehicle standard. If you have a electric speedometer already in there, you can just tap off of the speed sensor, just one wire. Since I don't have one, I went ahead and I ordered one of these guys. And what this is a Hall effect pickup. So basically what I'm going to have to do is fab up some type of bracket so that I can install this above the axle, so that it can read the teeth on there, and I'll show you the teeth in a second here. Supposedly these don't need power. Some sensors, 3-wire sensors, there's a power, a ground, and then an output. Supposedly this type, all you need is just the output, you don't need to feed it power or anything. It also came with a warning light. You know, I opened the box, I was like, why the hell did the speedometer come with a shift light? It's not a shift light, it's a warning light that you can plug into the back, and I guess, I don't know, I mean, I got no idea why you need a warning light on your speedometer. I mean, it's a speedometer, you can clearly see. I don't know, I mean, I guess there's some use for it. My only guess would be is that the tachometer is based off the same board and everything, and they just manufacture them the same and throw a different face and reprogram it for speed versus RPM. I mean, it's the same thing for the most part, just the scale is different. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the wheel off the car, take a look at that axle, and see if I can't rig something up. Alright, so sorry about the light, it's not the best, but here you can see the axle, and you can see these rings, these teeth on this ring, and that's used for the ABS, which this car does not have. I'm almost wondering if it would make sense for me just to go ahead and find a knuckle that does have the ABS mount for it, because I don't really know where I'm going to mount this. I'm thinking somewhere around right here. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking somewhere around here. But I'm gonna obviously have to make a bracket. I was hoping there'd be something I could bolt this to, but there's really nothing solid. Got this heat shield here. I could go on the bottom here, because there is this mount, but I don't know if I want to use that as a, well, that might work. Sorry, I'm like scratching because there's mosquitoes tearing me apart. But yeah, I'm thinking maybe down here might work, but I've got to figure out how to mount. I'm thinking I might just go up top, and then I can just bend the bracket and then just weld it into place, and that might be my best bet. Just that way it's oriented, you know, kind of like that, and then I can just zip tie this along and run it up into the inside the car. Yeah, I was hoping I'd have a better, I thought the teeth were further back and they were going to line up here, but that's not gonna work. So yeah, it's looking like I'm gonna end up making a bracket and then just welding it into place, because there's no other provision anywhere. Back by the brakes. That There's nothing. Alright, so here's my fabric hobbled bracket. Once this goes through the bolt, and then we got my sensor that's now covered in magnetic dust. Sensor will mount in there, like so. And I'll just show you what it's going to look like on the car real quick. Alright, I think now I'm at the point where I can test the tack out. Alright, so that's basically how that's going to look. I'll clean the bracket up and everything and make it look a little nicer, but that's basically it. Alright, so here's the bracket I came up with. It got really convoluted after a bit. Basically what I discovered was that the clearance, the air gap between the magnetic sensor and the teeth has to be really, really close, and so that didn't allow for any vibration. So yeah, that basically didn't allow for like any vibration in the sensor because it was just smacked into the teeth. So I had to go through and reinforce it a lot. Looks something kind of like Jeffro Mobile made. But yeah, so I'll throw some paint on this and get her installed. Alright, so I got the bracket done, sensors in there. So the thing I noticed about the sensor is that it has to basically be touching these teeth. I mean, it has to be really, really close. That's one of the reasons why I've reinforced the bracket, because at first a little bit of vibration wasn't a big deal, but since it has to be so close, if it vibrates it'll make contact. Yeah, I'll probably find another one. This is, one of the cheap Chinese ones, so maybe I'll buy a name brand good one. I don't think it puts out quite the voltage it's supposed to, but it works, kind of. So I've just got the line ran up, zip tied. I tied it to the brake line, since I know that, if the brake line is long enough to not bind up as the wheel moves in and out, that my cable won't as well. So, and that's just ran up around through the firewall and into the cockpit, the cabin. So yeah, it's just ran up and around through a penetration in the firewall and inside. And so there it is there on the floor, kind of dark, sorry. I hate to repaint the floorboard in here, it's pretty nasty. So my plan is to mount the gauge. I don't know what I did with it. I think it's on the table, yeah. So my plan is to mount the gauge right here, right in front of the stock speedometer. This bracket that came with it is too big, unless I go Mini Cooper style and mount it there, and I really don't want to. So what I'm going to do is I've got some ABS, and I'm just going to bend it and make my own little bracket to hold it. This will be a temporary kind of thing, because I've decided what I'm going to do is go ahead and get a tachometer, temperature gauge, and a fuel gauge. Maybe something else. I may have room for one more gauge. And I'm just going to go ahead and build a whole new instrument cluster. Because obviously I just don't like the way it looks sitting there. I'll show you what that looks like. Alright, so basically I want to mount it, you know, just right there, just to kind of chill there. A little hokey looking, but you know, it's a solution. It's a temporary solution. Until I buy the other gauges and just make a whole new cluster, and then everything will sit behind, because I don't want to modify this one. I have a spare one actually. Anyways, that's another video. So right now what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab some ABS and bend up a bracket so that I can mount this gauge in there. Alright, so got the bracket made, sits up in the dash. I just gotta get the holes drilled for this. Guess I should probably get the wires connected before I, yeah, whoops, getting ahead of myself. Alright, so before I get to that, I got some wiring I need to do. So with these Glowshift gauges, you can daisy chain them together. You can daisy chain 5 of them up together. That's 1 gauge plus 4. So it comes with a nice little cable, so you can just plug them together. But as you can see, it's not very long. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut this guy in half and splice these two together. Alright, so got it all installed. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look bad. It could be a lot worse. Yeah, I personally think it looks kind of hokey, just because of the way it kind of pokes out like that. It's a little ricey, but it's a solution for the current problem, which was, you know, me being a dumbass. Like I said, these wire in really easily. You saw me wire up the harness. All I had to do was run the input from this gauge to the output of this gauge, and so it gets power and everything. Does its thing with all the other gauges, and yeah. So now I just need to take it out, calibrate it, and I'll be good to go. The way I'm going to calibrate it, I'm just going to use a GPS app on my phone and try and match them up the best I can. I went ahead and I did the gear ratio, tire size calculation thing, and, you know, revved it up to that RPM, to whatever, you know, revved it up to a given RPM, and set it to what the what the calculated mile per hour should be. So that should have gotten me pretty close. Yeah, so I guess I'll take it out for a test spin and see how she works. Cool, so that kind of works. I got some options as far as changing out that sensor goes. I can get an amplifier for it. I can get an amplifier for it, which would work, or I could switch to a 2-wire or a 3-wire sensor, which is a powered sensor, and it gives out a much cleaner signal. But yeah, for right now this is good enough. I'll address it later whenever I get around to building the complete dash.